this meeting of the Housing and Community Select Committee. I am Councillor Claire Simmons, Chair of the Housing and Community Select Committee, and I will be chairing tonight's meeting. The event is being streamed live on YouTube, and members of the public and the media are welcome to watch the meeting remotely and listen to the discussions taking place. Now I would like to welcome everyone in Committee Room 1 at Kensington Town Hall and everyone watching on YouTube. Before we proceed with the meeting, I would ask members of the committee to please make sure your mobiles are on silent or switched off. I think it is appropriate for us to start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. With apologies for absence. I don't think we have any apologies for absence. So in which case, have we received any further apologies? Okay. Declarations of interest. Does any member have an interest to declare?
I'm a trustee of Citizens Advice Kensington Chelsea. It might be relevant for some of the discussion.
Thank you. Anyone else? In that case, I will just add that I am a trustee of the space, which may be relevant.
Yes, I'm also in the city live in local life. I'm glad here.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm a trustee for the Earl School Youth Club and the Forum for Residents Over 50 and the West End Trust. I think they all feature.
Yes.
I don't believe it's relevant, but I recently came off the board for the change.
Came off. Thank you. So in that case, we will move on to agenda item 3, which is the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 20th of June. And do we have any amendments to make? Yes.
Page 7, item 10. Discuss parent company guaranteeing continuity of plans to ensure that residents, I think it should say residents and councillors,
Yes.
will assure the appropriate government structure in place.
Thank you. Anything else? In that case, does the committee agree to sign the minutes of the previous meeting as correct record? Yes, with that amendment. Yes, thank you. So in that case, moving on to item 5, sorry, my mistake. This item 4, the voluntary and community sector support, agenda item 4. So this report outlines the range of discretionary support provided to the voluntary and community sector of the council, including the voluntary sector support fund and City Living Local Life programme, which were both key topics the committee expressed an interest in scrutinising. The officers have provided an additional appendix to this report, Appendix E, which details successful applications by ward for the CLLR programme. The committee is asked to consider the following: the range of ways the council could prioritise funding to the VCS in future, and the mechanisms through which grants are decided or awarded, for example, the role of public and residents in the decision-making process. Now I would like to welcome Councillor Sarah Addenbrooke, the newly appointed lead member for Communities and Community Safety, along with the Council's Director for Communities, Moira Ugoji, to comment on the report before opening up for questions from the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I am very new to this role, but looking forward to it immensely. I found this paper, for me, it was really helpful because it's got everything there which in one place, because I don't think we've had that before. So I'm sure you've all read it, and maybe Moira wants to add some more, but I found it really, really helpful. But yeah, early days for me, I'm afraid.
So I just wanted to go back. This time last year, we took a deep dive into the support to an investment with the BCS, which included contracts as well as property support and grants. And this time we have taken just the discretionary support, which includes grants as well as support around property and rates, and included here, just so that you can see not just the range of support, but also the organisations that receive that support and how the decisions are made for that level of support with the sector. And so it was just something that obviously the committee was interested in. We pulled this together, and you will see from the officers involved, we went from across the council all the support that discretionary support that is available to the sector. So at this point, I will open up for comments or questions or any advice.
Excellent, thank you very much, and thank you for an excellent report. I'd like to echo Councillor Addenbrooke's remark that this is actually a really useful place to have everything in one place like this, so thank you for doing that for us. I would like to invite questions from the committee. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Chair, and Lead Member of the Director. Thank you very much indeed for the paper. I agree, it is an excellent paper, excellent to have it all together, and that's very useful. I've got one comment on City Living Local Life, and then my was kind of really critical, and then I'll come back to my questions which are on the BSSA. And so starting with City Living Local Life, the administration of it, my personal experience over the last 6 months, it appears to be chaotic, in part, and really not satisfactory in all respects. That's not every case, but going into further detail on that would require discussing individual cases in public, which I don't think would be appropriate. But maybe some comments from you on the administration of the department or would be helpful, and then anything else we can take offline. The questions I've got on BSSF, and I think what perhaps we can go into more detail on is what we start to say in paragraph 4.9, which is about the assessing bids. So I'm wondering what criteria do you use to assess bids when they come in from organisations? How do you judge between them when there are more bids than budget? I would imagine that is the case. You can confirm that for me if you like, but it would be unsurprising if more people bidded than you can afford to spend. And then how do we, sort of next theme, how do we ensure that organisations are delivering services and outputs that are consistent with the council plan, and the majority of the beneficiaries are our residents, or don't we? I mean, that's the next question. And the final one is, how do we handle potentially contentious bids? So things which might be novel, politically contentious. What are the checks and balances that you've got that allow or stop money going to organisations that might embarrass the council?
Okay. So I will start with Living Local Life, the administration. Yes, I understand that it has been chaotic. There have been a number of challenges within the service around resourcing, but also the process has been, I think, over the years, the process has been not as streamlined as it could be. That's why we're having the review of City Living Local Life, to see not just where we can streamline processes, but where we can automate some of the processes to take out the human element, to speed things up, and to also make sure that we have a consistent process across the different applications and all applications. So hopefully that will be something that will improve the process considerably. We are still in the process of the review, and we're hoping that by the end of autumn that should be finalised. We will be seeking, we will be making recommendations and providing options to the lead member to consider the best process going forward, but we're very mindful of the current state of City Living Local Life.
Thank you. You've used two words there that when I was running an organisation, I would have shot you down for. One is hopefully, and the other one is by the end of autumn. So can you define that, please?
By the end of autumn is end of November.
Okay, so go on to the other question, saying thank you.
And can I just come in there? But I know SOF sent out an email to everybody asking for their thoughts and comments on City Living Local Life. So if you haven't sent them in, please do send them in, because I know there are a number of issues that have arisen recently, and I think we do really need to address some of that. So if you haven't, please send them in.
And in terms of assessing bids, you are quite right, we are oversubscribed by 300%. And so part of the first long listing, we have eligibility criteria, which is on the website, which excluded some organisations that could go beyond that stage. We're going through the due diligence stage at the moment. So looking at the technical criteria for the applications, and that will further reduce the number of applications going through. We still think we're going to be oversubscribed after that process. In terms of those organisations that have applied and we are oversubscribed, we will negotiate the amounts possibly. That's one way of reducing the demand on the 1.3 million which we do have. And another way is also look to see where organisations can link up, so that we're not having to fund two separate organisations that are delivering the same type of activity. And with regards to how decisions are made after that point, there's a cross-organisational panel that looks at the applications, so colleagues from commissioning in children's and colleagues from housing, colleagues from adult social care and public health look through those applications as well, and decisions are, well, not decisions, sorry, recommendations are made for the leadership team to consider. We also have the small grants, which is being administered by KNC Foundation, and that funding is going to go through the process with KNC Foundation and residents, a panel of residents that are currently being trained, and they will make recommendations for the small grants, which are up to £30,000, and those will go through the same decision-making process with the leadership team at the end of the year. So by 31st December, to give an actual date, by 31st of December, we will have the decision, and that will be ready for the 1st of April. We need to give 3 months' notice.
And does the leadership team have a genuine choice at that point if it is oversubscription, and particularly if there are contentious bids that might be politically embarrassing in the view of the leadership team, the Swedish Conservative leaders, do they have that chance to intervene?
So prior to the leadership team, it also goes to the lead member prior to that, but we should not at that stage have contentious applications going through, because it would have gone through the process beforehand with officers. They will know where issues are contentious, and also there will be advice from the lead member on which applications would go through to the leadership team for a final decision.
Thank you very, very, very much.
And those are
I think that was
Oh yes, the majority of residents, you asked about that,
Yes,
that
I
question. And the criteria said 50%, because some are wide borough, so we have to acknowledge that some of the residents will be from Westminster. But if they are based in Kensington, Chelsea, we're expecting at least 75% of their beneficiaries to be from the borough, because there may be some on the border as well.
Of course, and one of the recipients of the last lot I noticed as a postcode isn't in our borough at all.
Now, this time around, all the organisations have to be based in the borough. That was one of the eligibility criteria, and if they were not based in the borough, they cannot go forward with their applications.
Very much.
Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. Look, I thought it was a shame, so if you go to page 10 of the minutes, I think item 2 for the opinion scrutinised the criteria for the allocation of funding. It was actually in this paper. You didn't read it, in fact, you just said to Councillor Allen, you go to the website and look at the criteria. So I think it's a shame that we have missed an opportunity to review something that's been there for 3 years, between 2024 and 2027. I question for you going forward, because I don't think there's probably much you can do about it, is actually how can you bring scrutiny into the city living life and other things you do, that you actually factor scrutiny in earlier and properly, because this I find quite frustrating. I mean, I think everything that Councillor Hammond asked is spot on, but it's not here in this report. So I think we've lost an opportunity there. In terms of specifics, I think I wanted to understand, if you go to 4.7, why the IAD provision has been removed from this process, and to understand what is that process.
So the IAG provision has been removed because it's a very specific service, and we want to contract with the sector, and Foreign Sector Support Fund is grant funding. So we felt it wasn't compatible with being part of the grant funding process, because it, and also we're hoping to work and to encourage a consortium going forward. And we felt that it would be more appropriate to have this as a contract rather than a grant, and that's the difference. One is a grant, one's a contract.
Explain the difference.
The difference is it's a contract. You can be very specific with the deliverables and the monitoring in a way that you can't be with grants. Grants are a lot more, fluid in how they are utilised by the organisation. So we thought to really focus this provision, which is essential, it is better placed as a contract rather than a grant. The current round of Foreign Sector Support Fund is a mix of contracts and grants.
So, as I mentioned earlier, I've just come off Cameron Jones. One of the interesting issues that they've had is that some of the council, other, whether it's grant or an IAG, has actually come with lots of very onerous provisions that hoops they have to jump through. So they actually get to the stage where they have to employ another member of staff just to fill those boxes in that timeline. And actually, I do wonder if sometimes we're a bit too onerous, and whether we should look at getting the balance right between providing the services. And it also comes down to the question of how many residents do you, that can be really quite time-consuming. I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, but I think we need to get that balance right. I might just ask one question. City Living, and to a certain extent ENSL, I have found the ENSL process entirely frustrating, and I know of a bid or bids that have pre-existed and they're still not being delivered, and I haven't seen anything delivered in ENSL in my 2 years on council. And I think part of that is the process and then putting it into the pipeline, but there is an expectation with residents. And so for me, there are things that you have been able to do through City Living, where actually I would like to see not excluded from City Living, because there's a speed and practicality that you can do with City Living that you can't do with ENSL. And I would also like to pitch for, certainly I'm in a 2-member ward, so we have a smaller pot, but actually I would like to be able to carry potentially 5,000, a bit like holiday, you can carry up to 5 days forward. I'd like to be able to carry some forward if we need to do a bigger project for a future year. I appreciate you don't want to be rolling large sums forward, But I think for me, I have given them feedback. I find Ensel very frustrating, city living elements of it are frustrating. And I think this year we've created a perfect storm by saying we're not carrying forward, and as a result, everybody's flooded with bids, and then there's also this year's bids. So I think hopefully it won't be like that going forward.
And to respond in terms of monitoring the voluntary sector support fund and monitoring, I suppose, contracts and grants to the voluntary sector in general, we're very much aware how onerous it can be, and the information that we're collecting sometimes isn't used. So we're looking to streamline that and have a more consistent approach across the council. If we can get to the place where we have a single monitoring system for if an organisation has, let's say, 7 contracts with the council, only has to return 1 monitoring return, that is a really good place for us to get to. We had a conversation with the voluntary sector this morning about that as well, and we want to reduce our impact on the sector. So that's something we're considering going forward. And that will be part of our performance monitoring framework. With regards to the NSO process, I can take that back to colleagues in planning about the comments you've made, and I'm sorry you're finding it quite onerous. But for City Living Local Life, you can take away your comments around taking some balance forward, maybe having a cap on the amount that you can take forward, you can roll forward, and put that into the mix of options that will be considered for the members to make a decision on.
And then, one thing, is that going to come back to scrutiny? I think we have a meeting in November.
We did want to come back to scrutiny, and but I understand November is for budgets. No, not anymore.
To the chair, it's up to the committee if they want to add things to the
Okay.
agenda. They can. It doesn't just have to be budget.
I think we have a full agenda.
Quite a lot in November, a couple of short ones and 2 massive ones.
Yeah, we can do it offline.
Offline paper, would that work?
That would be great. Yeah. Offline paper. Councillor Rossi.
So, I also think it's very helpful having all these things brought together, but I think an opportunity has been missed in this paper in that I agree with Greg and Joanna that there isn't enough information about how the decisions are made and how the money is actually spent. And from the point of view of scrutiny, I think that's really exactly what we want to know. Who's taking the decision. The other thing is, because this is a first, this paper, we can't kind of stack it up against the ones before. So we have a list here of the recipients of various different kinds of grants and contracts. And what I wonder if we could see last year, the year before, etc., how much path dependency is there in the awarding of these grants? And as a second question, because we all recognise some of the bodies that are getting money, the second question is, if it's the case that the same organisations are getting money on a yearly basis, which I don't say is wrong, then how many of the organisations would actually fall apart if you said, I'm sorry, you're not going to get it this year? And does that influence who you give the money to? Because you think that if you don't give XYZ 10,000 this year, they're going to kind of not exist. So yeah, again, it's more questions about who gets the money and why, and building up a picture of, is it the same organisations getting it all the time, or is it new ones coming through, or what's the balance between those two things?
With regards to who gets the funding, it has been the case that because we transitioned from the corporate support fund to the voluntary sector support fund, it wasn't an application process, so the organisations that were previously getting funding continue to get the funding. And this was a challenge that we got from the sector, that it seemed quite a closed system. And that is why we, with the Voluntary Sector Support Fund, we have opened up access. And in terms of the organisations that are applied this time round, I would say it's 50-50 new organisations and the organisations that we currently fund. And the funding is not based on whether an organisation will fold if we don't provide funding. We did an analysis of each organisation that received voluntary support funding, and none of them, for all of them, it is a lot less than 50% that VSSF makes up of their budget. So if we don't fund them, they're unlikely to fold. There was only one instance, but unfortunately that did happen this year, and that was with the Welfare Neighbourhood Advice Centre, because they were solely reliant on voluntary sector support funds, but we do not have any other organisations that need the funding to survive in that same way. And this is not a factor considered as part of the decision making. And with regards to how the decision is made, we can again have a paper that goes through the detail of exactly how the decision is made, who is part of the panel of officers, which parts of the council they come from. We can provide that information to the board after this meeting.
Okay.
Councillor Lane.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. I think first of all, I'd echo all the comments made by my colleagues so far. I think specifically in relation to Silver and Sil, the way in which bids are made, decided, it seems like a Byzantine process when we're talking about relatively not a large amount of money compared to other items that the council spends money on. My first question is just in relation to paragraph 4, spot 18, in relation to unused budget, which was previously rolled over, now not being rolled over. Why was that decision made? What was the issue with the budget being rolled over? And what would you say to the idea that this alters the incentive structure for wards and they may now spend money on things they don't actually want or people are not asking for, but they feel like they have to spend this because if they don't spend it, they're just going to lose it at the end of the year? So that's the first
That has
question.
happened, I think.
Quite. So that's
£40,000.
that's the first question. The second question, and this is NSIL specific, I'd echo the comments from Councillor Gardner. I think NSIL bids not being delivered is a serious problem, and I know my ward specifically, there's NSIL bids that were approved by officers, approved by council that seem to be signed off, and were meant to be delivered this summer and have not been delivered, and there's no way to find out why. I don't know who's accountable for not delivering that. There's no transparency. I don't know which point in the process this failed. Has a supplier or contractor failed somewhere? Has an officer forgot, or has there been turnover? Someone left to go somewhere else to another borough and they were previously dealing with it, and that's why it's not been delivered. It feels like there's no way of knowing as a resident or council why your NSIL bid hasn't been delivered. So I think that's my second question, and just a final one, if I may. It's just in relation to, I think, what colleagues have mentioned about wanting to understand more about how the process happens. So, for instance, paragraph 4.26, there's a line that says, decisions are expected to be made in November, followed by confirmation to an executive decision. What rules govern that executive decision? Do the decision makers have full discretion, or are they actually bound by certain principles? There's lots in that sentence that I think is hidden, and it would be good to know throughout that decision-making process exactly what is governing each stage of that process. So I think that's my third comment, that hopefully will something that we can work on, I think.
With regards to ENSIL, so that's colleagues in planning, I can feed that back and get them to respond to those questions.
Maybe a written answer to the whole
Yes.
committee would be a
Yes,
good.
but I could just jump in here that I know in my ward with Ansell, we know this very well. It took us, I think, 15 months to get our camera up because we were relying on TfL. We couldn't get our planters installed because TfL wouldn't let us park and water the planters without us getting a fine because it's on the red route. So I'm not making excuses for everybody, but there are certain things that come into play which we just can't get round. So, but I think, yeah, we get our colleagues in the building to come back with.
Okay. And you asked, your first question was around city living local life and the rollover, and not having the rollover and disincentive or incentive around that. The reason for not continuing the rollover was that the rollover was not being spent. It was literally year after year. It was just building up with a lot of the wards. So we thought that actually let's reconsider the approach, and also that instead of different wards having different amounts, we would reset because the funding is such that it's supposed to be a certain amount each year, and we kind of wanted to, within that envelope, for communities to bid within that envelope. So we thought that that would be the best way forward. But also the funding could last longer. It could be used over a number of years. So that was kind of the thought process behind not having the rollover going forward. We didn't anticipate the consequences, that this would be the outcome of that. But as I said, we're still looking at what the current process is going to be going forward. So it's all information that we will consider as part of the options that we put forward to the lead member.
Thank you.
Councillor North.
Thank you.
Sorry to keep you waiting.
No, well, first of all, on a positive, I think anybody looking at these figures would see that we are a very fortunate borough to be able to do so much for our community and individual community cases. And I think anybody who can't see these and watching online to asking us or listening to us talk about these figures, they should really know that we are very fortunate in this borough. On page 18, 4.24, it says residents' views are sought on setting community priorities with regard to allocations. Can I just ask, how was this done? Was it done through speaking to RAs, or was it done through ward panels or citizen panels? How was the consultation now?
Unfortunately, I can't respond to that because I wasn't part of the process and it's not within my responsibility. But as part of the paper that we're going to send to the board of this committee, part of the paper that we will make sure that we include that information.
And I just want to echo the previous comments, especially made by Councillor Gardner about the rollover idea, that some of it could be rolled over rather than the use it or lose it approach we've got at the moment. But thank you.
Thank you, Councillor North. Did you have any comment, Councillor Easy? No questions. I have a few, so that's lovely. Can I start with the CLNR? So there is a review ongoing currently, and I'm just wondering, when you asked all councillors, what sort of percentage of response have you had? Do we have a lot of councillors yet to respond to that?
We do have a number of councillors yet.
I mean, I know that mine is outstanding.
But you've already had a conversation
Yes,
with you. Yes. But yes, we do have, it's about 15 have responded.
Right. Okay.
So maybe we should send a reminder.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, quite a
Sorry.
We did send a set a 31st of August deadline, and I know some people switch off for August.
there's also a balance between sending lots of reminders that annoy those that already responded.
Yes.
Well, maybe you could encourage your colleagues in your wards to respond.
Absolutely. Yes, I mean, in terms of the review, I think it's, I have to agree with the councillors who have raised the question of rolling over or not rolling over. I think when we look at Appendix E, albeit this is just for 1 year and it was an unusual year because we had a coronation, even just looking at this, I can see a little bit of a difference between some of the wards and some of the other wards in terms of what the number of applications and also what kind of thing it's being used for. One of the things I believe I've already mentioned is things like Grenfell anniversary activities and such related matters to do with recovery, in fact, in those affected wards, which I'm not completely sure that CLLL should be having that burden if the ward budget is the same across wards. So in terms of being a fairer borough, I wonder whether looking at the size of the budget based on, and I think we do need more years worth, or you would have more years worth to look at, making sure that the size of the budget is based upon needs, perhaps. And similarly with rollover, I mean, I think there are a number of possible solutions to that, which I hope you'll be looking at. Looking at one of the items, which I think actually in fact applies to more than one, is in terms of the accounting period. I know Councillor Hammond, you've mentioned this.
It's on the BSSF.
Yes, it's hard to compare from one to the other if you're looking at different accounting periods. And I'm just wondering whether that's going to be regularised going forwards. That this was this was, I assumed it was a transition factor. Thank you for that. That's been asked. In terms of the rent and rate subsidies, how do people get to know about this, organisations-wise?
Sorry, I'm sorry, completely asked for questions. In terms of the rent subsidy, this is a historic decision.
Right.
So we are looking at that going
Okay.
forward because we currently do not know how the decisions were made around who currently had those rent subsidies. So we'll be looking into that. And as part of that, if it's going to be reopened, then we will definitely make it known that this is available. In terms of rates, which is different, organisations are able to apply directly to the council for discretionary rate relief. And that information is available online on our website that they can, and when they go on there, they can get information about how they can apply for that. So it is publicly available.
Are all the organisations referred for business rates?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Thank you. And with Grenfell Projects Fund, I had a question outstanding from some time ago concerning the residents panel. 4.13 on page 17. We're looking at the next round of Grenfell Projects Fund, which is going to be, it's developed with the steer of the residents panel. Now, my understanding, the previous round, that was allocated on the basis of resident panel score and also public voting score. And I asked a question to one of the directors in May 2022 concerning that, which has not yet been answered. And I'm wondering whether there's been any learning from the previous round to this round, and will it be more transparent?
There's definitely been learning.
Okay.
We know that the previous round there was a lot of challenge around the outcome of the application process and the awards that were given. and we are working closely with the residents panel to ensure that the next round of Brentford Projects Fund, these risks are minimised. So it's definitely something that we're very much aware of.
Right. And do you know how many residents are on the resident panel?
Currently 12,
Fantastic.
and across all 5 wards.
Claire, on that, I think we're going to look at some of the consultation that's being done on restorative justice programme and also the JSNA, and that will feed in as well and be taken into account.
Fantastic. Do you mean in terms of like the themes?
Yeah, I think it's just going to look at the whole, you
Yeah.
know, the whole picture and just see what really is the need.
That's really positive. Thank you. And I think that's all my questions on that item. I think, do we have any members of the public who have questions? No? Yeah. So that's a no then. Thank you very much to both.
But can I just say thank you to Soph for everything she did over the last year and a half or whatever it is.
Sorry, thank you for answering all those questions, sorry.
Thank you.
Very good questions.
And just to, you know, confirm how important the voluntary sector is.
Absolutely.
Yes. Thank you.
So we have agenda item 5, housing management approach to damp and mould. This report updates the Housing and Community Select Committee on progress housing management is making in tackling issues relating to damp and mould. It provides context behind the causes of damp and mould, our historic approach to managing the issue, the changes that have been implemented and prevalence of the approach within Ulster. We have here Christopher Bay, who recently appointed new lead land manager, welcome, housing safety and building new homes, along with Director of Housing Management Doug Goldring, welcome, and his colleague Salika Fanti, welcome, to provide an introduction and then answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Commissioner. I'm very glad you're still scrutinising me, and I'm in a different role. So thank you. And I just about managed to sit on my hands and join the table with Sarah and Mara answering. But I thought all your questions were really relevant and really appropriate. And I know that Sarah and Mara really acting with that. So now to housing. I will very much leave this to Doug because I am still in major learning mode here, and I thought this report and the next report were really, really helpful, and I've learned a lot from this, so I'll leave it to Doug to introduce me.
I'll do a very brief introduction, that's okay, because I'm sure there's questions. But clearly the history in terms of our management of the council housing here has meant that we've had a higher prevalence of leaks than would be expected for the capital programme that's ongoing to deal with that. But so prior to the tragic death of a child in Rochdale that was at the inquest in November 22, we'd already started working on our approach to damp and mould because the Ombudsman came out with a spotlight report that said what good practice looks like. So we looked at our existing practice and set up a working group, which is chaired by Salika, so that's why Salika's here, prior to that. And what we've done is clearly change our approach. Our approach was quite clunky, if you like. It went through the call centre and then it went to a plumber or an operative go and have a look. Where it goes straight to the surveyor and it's triage for vulnerabilities. So if it's children or other health issues, then they get a visit next day. So that's in place. We've also expanded our supply chain. We've got more contractors that could deal with either eradicating any mould or dealing with ventilation. We've got some new initiatives that are just about to go live. One is in conjunction with public health concerning sort of warm and well. So we've got a surveyor linked to a health practitioner So when we get those urgent cases, they can work together. We've got some grant funding from public health to do that, and that goes live on the 2nd of October. So we're happy to we'll see what comes out of that, but it's about making sure that people are getting safe in their properties. And we've also set up for this year, because one of the factors, and I mean, just one of the factors is heat. If you heat your property, you're less likely to have condensation, which will then lead to dampness. There's lots of other factors, it's just one of them, so I just want to be clear. I'm not saying it's down to people not heating it, but clearly we put in a fund to help with the cost of living as well, which heating charges and the ability to pay that is a call off on for this year. There are still things that we need to do, and there's a quite a long action plan, which was a sort of supplementary to this. I don't know to the committee members, but that's our working document, if you like, on what we're doing. So things that we need to look at is how we embrace technology in terms of understanding trials and things like that. That is about how we then can monitor or allow people to self-monitor the dampness within their property. We've probably got a bit more to do on how we link our capital investment smarter to what we're delivering out there, and I've still got. We've expanded the amount of surveyors we have, but it's not an unlimited amount of surveyors, I'm afraid, in the country. So we've still got some. So we want to do a bit more on follow-up visits as well.
In that case, I will turn to the committee. Do we have any questions for Councillor Hammond?
Thanks very much, Chair, and so thank you very much for the paper, and to the member and director and other officers. I thought it was very helpful paper. Thank you. I've got 3 questions, and they're questions for detail rather than principle. So looking at the table in paragraph 4, and 4.2 illustrates the same point. We've got this huge jump at the end of 2022. Is that entirely because of the national level publicity after the case in Rochdale appeared at that point, or is there another reason why we got with it? It's also a winter spike, but it seems to be much larger than there isn't a comparable winter spike the previous year. What do you attribute that spike to?
I personally attribute it to the heightened awareness. It's not something people have to put up with. Yeah. So I think there's been a lot of people that have just put up with it in the past, and that's the health alarm that goes with that. There's many people who are reporting it, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. And then my second question, again on detail, paragraph 4.3, the way it's written, you could be learning a false lesson from it. It seems to be, maybe you're not, it seems to be saying that district heating is good and private boilers are bad. But what I don't know from this is what portion of the council's estate is heated by district heating, what portion by
So it's about 25% is heated by district heating. Around, I can get the exact figure. So it is it's better.
So there's a slight disproportion. So we would expect 75% of the cases to be individual boilers, not 82%. Then it's about 25%. So that factor would illustrate the point you're making, but it's not as extreme as it might.
I appreciate we could make that clearer.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm satisfied with that. And then paragraph 7.1 on the HHSRS assessment. Can you tell me how many have been done in the last accounting period, and then how many in the year so far, and then how many of them have been passes, how many have been Cat 1 failures, how many have been Cat 2?
I will need to find that information out. It's not in the report. I will go back to our surveying team.
Thank you. If we can have a written answer to that, that'd be really helpful. So, thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think this actually may tie in, very useful paper. Thank you. I wanted to know about how effective the timing is. So you have this Appendix 1, the novel consultation act. I may be that very if more specifically, but I actually want to know how realistically and how much are we meeting those, or that food, just to 5 working days all the way along.
So, yes, so we could have probably put in some statistics on that because we have performance indicators that reflect our performances in terms of delivering that. We have increased the amount of surveyors and we are meeting it at the moment in pretty well every case. We are about to go into winter, so so when it first, I suppose it just spiked. We weren't resourced for dealing with that at the time, so we've caught up on that and we've been able to manage that effectively over the summer. We are out for more surveyors, and we are if the level repeats as it did when the spike happened, then we will have a struggle to meet that deadline. But at the moment we're meeting it and we are trying to get more surveyors in because we do expect it to go up. We don't expect it to quite go up like it did last year.
Just 2 things. The House of Redress consultation sheet has lots of typos in it, so it's actually a very frustrating document to read.
Right.
You might like to look at that again. And then
We have a, yes, well, we'll feed that to our colleagues as well.
And then one of my questions, which actually also picks up in the next paper, is we, for example, in my own ward, I know there's a block, we keep getting individual cases involved, but actually when you look at it, you stand back and you go, yeah, it's all over this block. But where do we pick up where actually it's not just one flat, it's bigger?
Yeah, I can answer that. So we have a regular call over of our blocks, so our estates. So I do this every week, so most weeks, and we have a sort of league table, if you like, of not just by damp mould, by plumbing, by social behaviour, if you like, all the things that people contact us on, we will be able to, we disaggregate and we work out why these ones at the top. So if you take, I can pick up a couple of blocks, so 375 Portobello is probably one of my blocks that has had our blocks that's had quite a lot of damp mould, and so we've put in, especially, we've done quite a bit of work on the ventilation. There's been some external work done to the fascia because we've got some cold bridging that's going on. So we will put in some more responsive and bigger works to deal with that. So we've got more to do though. So that's at the very top because we know that. I think there are often pepper potted properties within quite large estates that can actually deal with when we get there on capital. But actually, if you look at the design where they're sat, there might be specific cold bridging going on in some of those properties, and we want to make sure that they're in the capital programme as we move forward.
Councillor Lane.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this report. It of course quite rightly focuses on the borough's own housing stock, but to my mind, a lot of properties in this borough affected by damp and mould will be private housing stock essentially. So my question is, what powers does the borough's private sector housing team have against dodgy landlords or to assist residents in the borough?
So happily, after I'm done, we will have the team behind you who actually manage that and will be able to answer.
Brilliant. Okay, fantastic question answered. Thank you.
Councillor Issa, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. Question 52 and page 51, question 4.1. I think 1789 support household. That is only for housing management only.
Yes, it is, yes.
And my question is 2 questions. Number 1, and how long it will take to resolve a problem of house and dam by a tenant, from your tenant? That's number 1. Number 2, what about private landlords and also housing associations is there any relationship between RBKC and other housing providers? Because many tenants, they have a problem of dam and mold, and it takes years and years, to respond and to solve this. This is a good question,
So you're quite right. So we've had 1,739 reports of dam or so dam that encompasses leaks as well. So it's any sort of water penetration into the building. And whilst we can ensure that the building is properly cleaned and properly ventilated, it is no guarantee. And where necessary, put in insulation, we look at windows and so on and so forth. There's no guarantee that it won't return, and that's the area that we've probably got a bit more work to do on, because that's 1,739 reports. Some of those will be duplicates. 4.1 it is. So for us, it's about then taking that to the next level, because what we want to avoid. So there are other boroughs that have a worse problem where actually it then ends up being not only is it bad for the resident and prejudicial for health, it's also bad in terms of local authority, in terms of legal action and the rest of it. So we do our utmost to make sure that doesn't happen. So we have had to visit more than once, but we need to find a more permanent solution linked to the capital programme. And then in terms of registered providers, we meet as a local group, COJO SARPON chairs, but we have shared best practice in terms of what we're doing and also what they're doing in terms of damp and mould, because some of the issues, certainly around some of the technology that's being used, is something that we would, so instead of us having to keep sending us about, are you okay, actually technology can tell us if a resident wants that, of course, there's data issues and the rest of it, but the technology is there to tell us that sort of things, and they're the sort of things that some of the registered providers are exploring in a much bigger way than we've got to so far. So we've got some work to do on that, and that's sorry, so that's your work, man. So that's what we're working, but we do share best practice.
Councillor Rossi.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Doug some questions about your advice to people on condensation, because we all know we are in a time of cost of living crisis and fuel poverty. So, I mean, I still open my windows. It's not cold. No. I have a washer dryer. I never use the drying machine, so I always dry my clothes because of how much it costs. I've got extractor fans in my bathroom, kitchen, and I switch them off because they use so much electricity. So I don't know what the answer is, and then there doesn't seem to be a way around it, but people are presumably going to make the same decisions that I'm making.
So the extractor fans we're putting in now are quite energy efficient and they're quite cheap, and we do share that data. I can't quite remember what it costs to run, but it's in the pennies to run, because that is an issue for us. What we know is that good through flow of air circulation will reduce the prevalence of condensation. So it's important that we properly ventilate. I mean, we have done quite a lot of experiments with ventilation, right up to mechanical heat equipment, which means that you actually have to keep the windows closed and you actually create the environment. It hasn't proved super popular with people, and it's quite expensive, so it works, but I think people want to be able to open windows and do that sort of thing. So we need to work through with residents about what suits them. So if you look at, say, some of the buildings that we acquired, like Bowmore and Middle Row, which were reasonably new build, they come with those systems, and they're not universally popular, but they will help manage the condensation. So we've got to, so what we do is the surveyor will speak with the individual and reach a sort of partnership type arrangement. I think this is what we can do, and this is what would help within your your ability to pay for something. I mean, we know that people can't just stick their heating on full.
And does condensation really cause it? Is that the main cause for getting mould?
So, what in terms of mould, it will be. So we've got lots of other causes of damp mould. So we've got a very high prevalence of leaks and leaking waste pipes and the rest of it. Usually we can get there when we fix it. We have very few incidences of rising damp or anything like that. So most of the condensation is quite prevalent. We wouldn't say we also share data or certain anecdotal data with other boroughs, so we know roughly that we're not above average in terms of the prevalence of it. But what we do realise is that we've got stock that needs a lot of properties and homes that need a lot of investment, and we know that we've got some areas where the insulation could be improved, and that's what we're aiming to make sure that we do as part of our capital programme as we move forward. Windows help and occasionally don't help, so they help in terms of keeping the heat in, but also they need to make sure that there is a way for air to escape as well, so that you don't build up condensation. But we've done quite a few thousand windows as part of the capital programme in the last couple of years, so that is helping move things forward.
Yes.
Can I just add here, because one of the first questions I asked when I took over from Councillor Ted Smith, who I'd just like to officially thank for all these stuff years, because I'm sad to have moved on where we are in housing when he became a new member. But one of the first questions I asked Doug was, so how are we on repairs? Because as you keep saying, a lot of some of the issues aren't just a foggy bathroom, but they are caused by leaking pipes and everything. And we inherited a huge backlog of repairs, and by and large we have got through them. And but our daily maintenance repairs budget is still about 16 million, I think, isn't it? And so all of that will be being used to address some of these longer term issues. And then all of that is part of the, then he's mentioned the capital works projects, and that's I think 500 million, isn't it? Which is a
There are plans at the moment to spend. So we've got quite a lot of capital works that are on site, and over 30 of our estates have currently got works going on. And as we get through that, we think in a few years' time, most of the estates that we've got should be at least reasonably well insulated and more in tune with where we need to go to get it.
So then that will address what we're looking at in the specific paper. In the bigger picture, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it reduces it. I mean, sometimes if you create a warm, airtight bubble in the river, then actually we have had issues where we got, but it will certainly address the comfort for people living in, because new windows make a huge difference.
Thank you. Well, I've got just two positive things to say. I think this is excellent advice and useful, and it's very practical, and there's lots in there that I think our residents will benefit from. And I just want to also pay, in the last 2 years in my own ward, and my own ward has one of, if not one of the oldest buildings in Cambridge Social Housing, which has its own challenges. And the residents' associations in both those two buildings, we had a meeting in the room next door last night, and the officers came and gave up their early evening to attend it. We had a fire officer, we had a housing officer, safety officer. It was amazing, and there was such a can-do attitude in the room, and the feedback from the residents was outstanding. And that's from two of what were traditionally difficult blocks with very old infrastructure. So I just wanted to pass that on.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from any members of the public to ask? In that case, I will move to myself. Thank you very much for this report. It is very helpful in laying out the nature of the problem, I think. One question I wanted to ask is on page 51 and 52. We're separating out damp and mould and condensation. Now, my understanding, and I appreciate I'm a layperson in this field, but my understanding is that if you have condensation, you will have mould sooner or later. So separating those two things out, I can understand there would be more than one cause of mould. And leaks and overflows and rainwater and so forth is something which is a matter of repair, which is improving, I think. Whereas when we have condensation, which is one of the things that definitely will cause mould, I think we need to be, first of all, looking at how we're understanding the causes of that. Because although, as I would agree with Councillor North, this leaflet that you have for residents at the back about how to address, it is helpful. If you have that problem, you need to be able to know how to mitigate it. But ideally, you wouldn't be having that problem at all. Now, the social housing regulator has been doing some research, and I'm not sure if our local authority has responded to their research. It was one of the ones that did.
We have, yeah, it's absolutely no regulator over everyone, and we respond.
Fantastic. I wasn't sure if it had written to all local authorities. But from that piece of work that they did, some very interesting things came out. I think it's separate from the Ombudsman Spotlight report.
It is, yeah. That came out in July.
Yes. And this one came out in June.
On June, sorry.
So one of the things that they identified as being sort of better practice is where you have better governance, and that is in councils where the councillors are kept aware and kept informed about the current stock survey reports, the current incidents and the effectiveness of solutions, the length of time that it's taken to resolve the issue and so forth. So I'm really very pleased to be able to say that we're having this item at this committee. And I think I have asked for numbers of how many cases we currently have and how long they've been ongoing, and I think we did receive them, is that right, Luke?
Yeah.
It's 572, I think, is what the IT system is telling us. That's ones we haven't closed. I'm not saying that they've all got damp and mould issues at the present moment in time, but they are ones that we have not said is definitely cured. And that's why they're.
Because one of the other best practices is actually that you have follow-up. So once it's been implemented, that you have follow-up at 3 and 6 months to make sure it doesn't recur. And this is one of the things I think you were mentioning in one of the earlier answers, is that we can implement some of these things in the leaflet, but it's likely that it will recur.
Yeah, I think we've got more to do on the follow-up visits, because it's for us it's a question of resourcing.
Yeah.
And we are always out for more surveyors at the present moment in time. And we need, I mean, we've got apprentice posts and stuff like that that we've had, but ultimately training as a surveyor takes 4 or 5 years. So when this happened last year, lots of providers are clearly all in the same boat, trying to expand their portfolio, but not necessarily. And for us, it's really important to get the right surveyors and to do the job. If you get a bad surveyor that diagnosed anything correctly, then that really does create
It's a big problem, of course. And that takes us on to another of the better operational approaches, which is, and I think it would benefit this whole committee in fact, to help to have a clear understanding of what are the causes of condensation. Because if I were to look at this leaflet, a lot of what we're doing is dealing with a symptom and not necessarily a cause. And I can certainly understand you wouldn't be able to address a cause if you didn't know what it was. So this speaks, I think, to the surveyors. I think actually people qualified with the relevant expertise to be able to identify the problem?
So we have, we've done a number, so where it's not quite straightforward, then we do have some equipment like thermal imaging cameras, and we do heat loss surveys and the rest of it to try and work out where that whole bridging, if there is any, is occurring within that property. And really what we're dealing with is sometimes you will have indices within a property such as overcrowding, which will add moisture into the air. It's then about how we manage that moisture when it's in the air, so it's properly ventilated. And because if it isn't properly ventilated and you've got cold surfaces, it will create and lead to mold. So it's about what we do is we try and work with the residents, try and work out a solution that will suit them.
And I think it's really important, and I think that's one of the things in the report, that we're moving away from asset blaming. And I appreciate that because Dan has mentioned that previously, that to move straight to a surveyor kind of approach rather than looking at even implying that this is a lifestyle, because actually people do need to breathe in and out. And I'm interested to note that you're talking about linking it to the capital works programme and insulation. And I'm wondering what other structural solutions may have been considered, if any.
So usually insulation is what you would want to do. So heat and insulation will help you in terms of managing it, provided it's properly ventilated. Clearly, if we've got, we have done some things, internally, but that often, reduce your space, so we can do things. We can put insulation inside. We can do all kinds of things that we can offer. But it, ultimately, it's about making sure that you are dealing with the science also between that together,
Exactly.
so that appreciate people can breathe and the rest of it, dry clothes or whatever. We need somewhere for that to go, and it's about working with people there to make sure that we put something in their properties. That's why we've been doing quite a lot of experiments on ventilation.
That's great. I mean, not every property which is overcrowded necessarily has this problem.
No.
And obviously, the ultimate solution, if you're managing something, then that's not a repair being completed. So in terms of actually completing this repair, because it is a repair, I'm wondering if you have looked into alternative solutions other than insulation.
So other than ventilation and insulation, in terms of and putting technology in,
Solar, mechanical, ventilation, heat recovery.
oh yes, so that's the ventilation part that we've been having.
Fantastic.
But it hasn't been universally popular. So we are trying to find something that is cheap to run, doesn't take up a lot of space, and allows people to use their property in a conventional way, I suppose. I'm not saying that we would. So that would be a discussion we would have with the residents. So initially, what we want to do is try and tackle this at an early stage. But if there are a few properties we know that do have are harder to insulate and heat than others, and we need to do some additional work, and that's where we've offered these sorts of ventilation systems.
Excellent, thank you. And finally, just before we move on, I would just like to say, in this leaflet, I would like to bang the drum for window vacuums in terms of removing condensation from windows. I personally found it worth a dream.
So
It won't work for everyone, I'm sure, but it's a very nice way to remove the condensation when it's stopped.
So us helping residents by providing that ourselves would be something we would obviously seek to do, because we think that and give that. So look, this might help you. We're not going to say that's the solution, it's done, but it might help. So those sorts of things are definitely high up on our agenda.
Excellent. Well, thank you all very much indeed. So we can move on, I think, now to agenda item 6, which I know some of you have already asked about. Enforcement powers and improving the quality of registered provider homes. Councillor Hello, Head of Environmental Health Services, and his colleague, Annette Asker, are here to provide an introduction and then answer questions from the committee.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to hand straight over to Tim here. And I think it's great that you've got both these papers in the same meeting. And obviously that's planned, so thank you very much, because as the practice proved earlier, they're completely interlinked. So thank you. And also just what you said on the last one, just scribbling notes about survey reports to councillors. Yes, essential. So thank you for asking that and bringing that up. Excellent. And actually also probably just all councillors, not just scrutiny. So,
okay, good evening. I don't need to say much, apart from reminding you that we are an enforcement arm of the council. We enforce against private rented, landlords of private rented accommodation, which is basically any accommodation that's not provided by the council. And that trick is an extremely renowned and experienced officer in London who's done a lot of work in this area. He's currently leading the enforcement side of environmental health and has produced the paper that hopefully you've seen. And then also have a look through and basically ask us anything you like about poor quality accommodation, what our powers are, and we'll tell you. And if anybody's really interested, we're happy to take you out to show you some of the problems that we're dealing with, even in 2023. And the discussion that you raised about condensation, heating, insulation, it's incredible. You know, our stock in this borough is very old. It's very, very difficult and challenging to deal with. And we deal with the landlords, we try and help them, but also we try and force them to do things as well with proactive notices to force their hand to do things. So please ask us anything you like.
Councillor Gardner, you were first.
Thank you. It is that. So I know for a fact housing for women is a challenge within our ward, and it is actually the sort of one tenant comes forward and then maybe 4 months later somebody else comes forward, but actually you discover that once you start asking, and so it is, how do we identify those blocks, and also how can we be proactive in that you get one case comes across your inbox, but actually once you start going into the block, you discover that it's in the block, but you don't know it. So what's the tipping point for you to go, actually, this is a bigger block issue, or separately, this is an operational issue because it's not just that block, it's another block that they also own in the same ward. And so for me, it's how do we tell the residents, A, the services around, and B, how do you go to, this is a block issue, not just one flat at a time.
We start with the block issue.
I mean, realistically, what happens is that we will get one service request, first of all, say for damp penetration in a flat within a block. Obviously, everything that we're doing is recorded on a database, so quite quickly, whenever we look at a property, we will see all the other addresses there. So it's quite easy for us to start to pick up these issues quite quickly. Also, depending on the kind of defect that's being talked about. For example, if you've got a block where you've got damp penetration into one flat and it's a top floor flat, of course you're going to have a look at the adjoining units of accommodation because there's likely to be a problem with the flat roof or something like that. So, you know, we kind of sense our way around these things. And what we do normally is that we will always follow our enforcement procedure, which basically means that we will liaise, communicate informally with the registered provider first of all. they may already have works in hand, they may have contractors set up to deal with a particular issue. Sometimes that's not what's happening at all. And we can, on some occasions, get involved in quite protracted discussions with them to really to really ascertain, have they understood the defects? Do they really know that the defects are affecting more than one of their units of accommodation? And you know, as we move forward, it can be in some situations we will have to move to enforcement. So we keep a good eye on blocks, but there is a bit of a tension for us because we can't become proactive surveyors for registered providers. We can only do so much. We are an enforcement authority, and I think I made that point in the report. So there's a bit of a balancing act for us. Within the council itself, within the housing department, there's a registered provider liaison relationship manager. So quite often when we see that something is going quite wrong in a block, we will liaise with her to have that conversation with the registered provider to get an idea of what their capital works programme is like, what kind of planned maintenance they've got coming up, so we can get a good idea of whether they've got a grip of the situation or they haven't. But it's incredibly resource intensive, and that is the thing for us. You know, there's quite a few blocks that are out there that we do know there are issues with them, but we can only go so far in terms of being the enforcing authority, and then have to go back and highlight those issues to the registered provider. Where we feel, like I said in the report, where you've got significant hazards, category 1 hazards, we've got a duty to take action, and we will serve notice as quickly as we possibly can. Other times you'll get a combination of what we call category 2 hazards, so you get lots of clusters of issues, but of course that has a significant impact on the resident as well, because they're living with a multitude of defects at any one time. So it's quite a complex sort of area, but we do know the housing stock across the borough quite well, and obviously we've got officers that are out in particular areas. They know what these blocks look like. So and you do get this small creep of, you know, a mouse infestation in one flat in a block. If there's not proper proofing, that will go throughout the block. So we know the kind of things to look for.
And then just
If we over block mean.
There's a couple, and just picking up on people finding out about us. That's the most difficult challenge. Probably every week someone goes, "Oh, I didn't know the council could help with this." Didn't know, and it's out on the web, asking councillors, well, you know, you meet your residents in the ward, etc. Knowing the powers we have, and we have prohibited the use of flats in the last 6 months. It's so dreadful. The powers are there, but it is the eternal problem of people getting to us and finding out.
And I think it's fair to say that by the time people are complaining to us, things are really quite bad. As you probably saw from the cases.
Thank you. So we have Councillor Hammond and Councillor Isley and Councillor Exton.
Very much, Chair. Thanks very much for the paper. I've just got a bit of commentary really, rather than questions. I think I've had 2 successful case studies in my ward. One involving housing for women, and one involving L&Q, which I think back up the approach that you described in here, and both of those either have or are moving successfully to a conclusion, we hope. So I'm grateful for that individual activity in my ward, which does illustrate that what you described works. I found the statistics at Appendix 1 extremely useful, albeit they don't go back very far. But I think because they're so useful, I think it would be good to see them in a year's time with a much larger set of data. And I did quite a bit of analysis on them to see whether the proportions, I'm sure you've done the same exercise, and the only conclusion I drew from it is that housing for women is much higher than it should be. So I excluded all ones with small numbers, but the housing for women for me did stand out in the data. In terms of other anecdotal evidence, the Kensington MP did a survey of housing association residents recently. I don't have all the figures in front of me. I have seen some of the analysis. The one I'll share because it's positive is tenants of Women's Pioneer Housing by some margin they were the best, came out as the best landlord of the registered providers. But the others really competitive results I think were fairly predictable in line with the table and your own experiences, I think, in the experiences we've had. L&Q on the national naughty step with some very scathing reports by the Secretary of State. I'm surprised their stats aren't, from my own experience, aren't worse, but they're broadly in line with what you'd expect from here.
I think also just to say with those stats that it's really dependent on people coming forward. So that is just a snapshot of somebody's ability to come forward and ask for our support. So
it is, as you'd expect, the largest landlord has got the largest number of people coming forward, and the ones with small estates have very few coming forward. So there is some kind of correlation there. And I think once we've seen another year's worth of statistics, we might be able to deduce a bit more from that. So all I would say is that the main council have an amber flag against them based on the statistics. Years time might be able to tell a bit more. But thank you for your effort, and I think my personal experience backs up what you're saying in this report.
Councillor Eason.
Thank you, Chair. Page 69.4.9. The end of the paragraph says, there is a state provision to take enforcement action against rude or poor housing associations or private landlords. So in page 73, it shows that Notting Hill, Housing Genesis, they are the highest one for residents' complaint. Is there any action or enforcement has taken against them?
against
Notting Hill Housing Genesis.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So I would like to know how, what actions has been taken, how many actions,
I can't give you that information now.
generalize it.
I couldn't even generalise in terms of action against a particular registered provider here. I think it's fair to say that we've taken action against most of the registered providers in some shape or form over recent years, and that can range. If you look at, just to explain a little bit, if you look at the council's our enforcement policy, basically what that says is that when we encounter an issue, we should try to resolve it informally, first of all, with the landlord, and that's any landlord, whether it's a private landlord or a registered provider. So we will do that. It's only where we feel that informal communication isn't working, we will then move towards enforcement action, and we can take lots of different types of enforcement action. So we can take action under the Housing Act, which might be something like an improvement notice where we're saying to a registered provider, you need to sort out this damp, you need to sort out these defective windows, that kind of thing. And we will give them a period of time to actually comply with the notice. So we can do that kind of thing. And then there's other pieces of legislation out there as well that deal with pest problems and various other problems. So we are taking action wherever we feel it's appropriate to do that, regardless of which registered provider it is. You asked specifically about Notting Hill Genesis. We have taken action. We have taken that type of enforcement action against them. But I wouldn't be able to provide here that kind of level of detail. But we have taken action against them.
Yes, because the reason I ask you, if strong actions has been taken, they will improve. There is many tenants, who has dam, mold, and mice or infestation, and if their tenant is asking, it takes years and years and years to respond. So that means, they are not improving. And this needs, to really review or look it again and see, how can RBKC tenants live in decent homes because they pay rent and they live accommodation that's not suitable for themselves and their children.
So, ultimately, if somebody is living within a Nottingham Genesis home, it is the responsibility of the registered provider to ensure that that home is fit. It's fit for somebody to live in it, and that the housing conditions there are good. Now, if that tenant complains to any registered provider and they're just not getting the service that they need, and that's where we say they can come to us in environmental health and private sector housing, which is what happens. So we get thousands of service requests every year where people do come forward, and quite often it is because they've been waiting for so long for some basic repairs to be undertaken. So they can come to us, and at that point we will go and we will do an assessment of their home and decide whether we can take any enforcement action. And then that puts, if we take the enforcement action, that puts a timeline on any landlord, any private landlord or registered provider. They have a period of time to actually undertake repairs that we've agreed with them. So we will provide them a schedule that tells them exactly what they want to do. And then if they don't comply with that, then we have different choices really in terms of what we do next. We can serve them with another civil penalty notice. They get more notices, which means they have more financial penalties against them. Or in certain cases, we can move to prosecution as well. So, we've got different ways of dealing with things. And quite often, just the fact that we get involved means that they will start to respond quite quickly because they understand that, at the end of the journey with us, if things don't get better, then there is enforcement. So people need to come to us as well, but also they need to go to the registered provider to explain their problems. But I understand what you're saying about the length of time it can take.
Thank you.
Councillor Rossi was first, I think.
Okay. Sorry. Can you tell me something about the social housing regulator, who the social housing regulator is? Were they introduced in the recent Housing Act, or because you suggest here that depending on how that sort of works out, you may or may not have as much to do. So the private sector housing service, as I understand it, is an enforcer. What is the regulator? It's like an enforcer on the ground. Who is the regulator and what are they doing? And why will their remit affect the work that your team does?
You should.
The social housing regulator, for these changes here, this is all quite new. So in reality, when I've drafted this paper, it's a little bit unknown in terms of exactly what their role will be.
So were they introduced in that recent act?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
okay.
these additional responsibilities have been introduced. So the social housing regulator was there before, but they have additional responsibilities now, which we've listed here. So things like power to issue unlimited fines, power to undertake inspections. What that actually on the ground is going to look like, honestly, at this point in time, I don't know. I don't know how that's going to be resourced, how difficult that's going to be to get up and running. So it was just to put that in there as something that is new, that we will have to see whether that means that there is really significant increased pressure on registered providers, which of course would mean that we could, move away from some of it. I suspect that, I think there are so many, there's so much accommodation that is, the conditions are quite poor, that we're going to be quite busy for quite some time now.
And
But it remains to be seen exactly how this is going.
and were you given greater powers in the Social Housing Regulation Act?
No, we have actually lots of powers.
Yeah.
Already under the Housing Act and other Environmental Protection Act and those things. So
Okay.
we have quite a lot of powers that we can use, so it didn't impact on us.
Councillor Lane.
Thank you, Chair. Quite great this time. Two questions. First, again, I know I'm echoing concerns of colleagues here, but Appendix 1, the stats for housing for women really do stand out. It's one complaint for every 25 dwellings. You contrast that with the largest provider, Notting Hill Genesis, is sort of 1 complaint, 600 dwellings. It's such a big difference. And I know Queensgate and mine have all had specific problems with housing for women property. So I think the anecdotal evidence backs up what these stats are saying. In relation to these sort of rogue registered providers, are we limited to remedial action, or can we stop them acquiring new property in the borough to make sure the problem doesn't happen in the first place? Do we have any of those powers? I mean, I'd imagine not, but is there anything we can do to stop them acquiring more?
I think that's probably more a question for Dan. From an enforcement perspective, I wouldn't really be able. I don't know the answer to that.
Thank you.
But what we can do is, where we're aware of problems, obviously we're going to be looking more carefully in terms of the responses that we get initially, where we feel there's particular problems, and the number of service requests that we're receiving in respect of a particular registered provider is going up, and of course we're going to be more diligent in our approach to it. But in terms of how they acquire things, I can't answer that one, but we can take that.
Thank you. And just a second question, if I may, Claire. This is in relation to private sector housing more generally, but I'm curious to know if there are issues in the common area of the property, say for instance mould in the common area of the property, do you have specific powers against block management companies? Because in some buildings, especially sort of governance structure, especially the share of freehold, it's very complex. So what would your approach to be in terms of issues in the common area?
Yeah, so when we look at any property, obviously we'll be assessing where the defects are. And there's the procedures around the Housing Act make it quite clear, so makes it quite clear in terms of how we serve notices, depending on where the defect is actually found. So that means that within one building, and obviously here we can get some very, very complicated buildings, it could be that we're not only are we serving on the freehold of the building, but we may be also serving on leaseholders, and in some circumstances that can be a combination of registered provider, private landlord. So we're quite used to having to serve enforcement notices in quite complex scenarios, which then means that a damp problem in a common area could quite easily be going into flats as well. So you've got to make sure that you deal with it, and it could be coming from the roof. So you have to make sure that you're covering off all the different areas.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
I'll just follow up on Will's question, which was, it's quite clear that Greg's had an issue in Cookfield, had an issue in Queensgate and Pembridge with housing for women. Is that, I mean, that's 3 out of 18 wards, and perhaps it's magnified elsewhere. Is it actually therefore worth getting women, housing for women actually in to talk about their general state of the stock? Because it's clearly popping up at least 3 wards and possibly more.
Okay, so it's an option. I think these stats are not, it's not so I used to manage the private sector housing team 12, 13 years ago. We had a similar problem. And it's a combination of the stock they hold, the staffing, so you heard that Doug just can't get surveyors. A lot of these resident providers can't get housing officers to even deal and interact with their tenants. And as Annette has said, it's difficult because we're an enforcer. We're not here to say, why don't you do this, why don't you do that? They've got to sit back and say, crikey, we're getting a lot of pushback from the council, maybe from Dan's area, they choose not to place people there if that's even an issue. But an example, so anecdotally, we use the Noise and Nuisance Service to serve an enforcement notice on a women's pioneer project. Upgrade the sound installation because it was absolutely dreadful. And their comment was, well, if you do that, we'll sell the property and you lose the accommodation. And he said, well, we can't not serve the notice, we've got a duty and it's intolerable for the tenants. Anyway, they spent £40,000 doing the property up. It's fantastic and amazing. That means some spec. But it's very expensive. It was a very expensive thing, and they did sell it afterwards. And the tenants in that block have, I don't know where they've gone, they've been rehoused somewhere else. So it's a really difficult, the question you've asked is actually very difficult for us to deal with most of a bigger policy thing than us coming in from private sector housing. That's why I said at the very beginning, we're a bit, with the enforcement side, people want to talk, some people don't want to know about us because we're stepping on the toes of landlords that are providing service to residents, etc. But we can't sit by if that accommodation is not good enough. I know that's not really the answer you want, but we wouldn't walk away from it.
Jack, can I just jump in here because obviously Jim, the team come under, technically Jem Kamali and housing comes under me, but this is the crossover here with the registered providers and private sector housing. And I know Dan Hawthorne's in the room. And I think we're going to take this away and I want to find out more about how the strategic working group is going that's mentioned in the paper. That comes under COJO, so that's very much a housing aspect. And see what we can do about if there are kind of repeat offenders for whatever reasons, whether it's the stock or whatever, what we can actually do from a housing point of view. So you can obviously carry on doing your enforcement, but then if it's saying more properties coming up, then we'll do something about that. So I think we'll take that away. So I'm looking at Dan Hawthorne with that action.
Certainly, we do have one property that the council takes all the accommodation in it, and that keeps coming up again and again with issues. And so I think Dory's already asked the question, is there something we can do with the block? Well, I have to take that offline.
Yeah, please do. And I've got to catch up with COJO this week, so I will find out more about that. Thank you.
Just going to chip in, and it strikes me the forum for those kind of conversations that Joanna's very properly raised, the Big Registered Providers Forum, is where you get the opportunity to bring them together, and where the statistics come up, that could be a conversation with more of them around the table and in private, and have a conversation with them.
And I'd just like to acknowledge Councillor Hammond's input in setting up that registered provider forum. So thank you for that, because that's very, very useful. I look forward to actually taking on this.
Do we have any other questions from the committee? From any members of the public on this paper? No? Thank you everyone for that excellent discussion. Thank you for the very helpful paper. I think we've got a few things maybe to follow up with on that around the forum and the strategic working group. I would quite like to see, and I don't know if this is possible, we have some case studies in the back here, appendix 3. I wonder if you have any data on how your enforcement actions that you take and how the outcomes.
Yes, we do have some.
And do you have those by provider?
We could do.
Because it might be quite helpful, I think,
I
for
think,
the committee.
yeah, it's worth saying that if we take enforcement action or serve a notice, when it's complied with, the notice is written off. So you've got a success there,
Yeah.
if you like.
I think so.
Although it was a negative way of getting to the success, it is a success.
Exactly.
Mm.
So It might be useful to know how many of these enforcement actions end up being taken because they would represent a case that wasn't resolvable by informal means.
What I would say is that some of the logging of the property type, i.e. that it's a registered provider, hasn't been really very good in the past. And that's something that we've really focused in on over the last 4 or 5 months. We're moving into autumn, winter time. We get a higher number of service requests coming in, there's more activity. So it might be worth looking at it maybe in the springtime, because I think you get a much more accurate picture of exactly what we're doing by that time.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. So maybe that's the work towards for spring.
And my offer stands if there's any councillor who'd like to go and private sector housing team. I know it's a nightmare for it to organise, but we're very happy to take you out because it's a really important part of environmental health. Some, making sure someone's opinion.
I think quite a few of our constituents have already shown
Sometimes it's good to go with an officer.
Sometimes it's good to go with an officer, and also sometimes it's good to go outside your ward as well.
Yes.
So I certainly would be very keen to take you up on that kind of offer, and hopefully some of the community as well. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we now move on to agenda item 7, which is the work programme. And we have the detailed work plan for 23-24, appendix 1. So yes, the committee is invited to discuss the report and agree the work programme for the next meeting, which is on the 28th of November 2023. That's good. Any questions or comments from the committee?
And the question was, usual site visits. I think it says in the minutes, we'll agree site visits before today.
to our officers to the right.
No, not yet. We're figuring them out at the moment. I've had some discussions with officers, and then obviously the enforcement visit will be one. And then Nick will help me organise those as well.
So we have enforcement visits as of today, in fact, and also the new homes programme, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be good.
Yes.
See you know,
Absolutely.
and to see them more.
And there'll also be visits included in the working group as well.
Yes. So that's to be discussed by the team. Thank you very much.
So it's quite full, the next meeting.
Yes.
I think 2 of them are probably quite short, but then on the other hand, the budget could be quite substantial, so we've got enough there.
Yeah.
Yeah, fire safety as well.
So are we all agreed with this work programme? Yes.
Agreed.
Agreed. Everyone?
I think we've got a question in 2.2.
Yes. I have that on my list also. So 2.2, select committee members are recommended to agree a lead member for the repairs conference in the new year. So this will be one of us. Do we have any member who would like to step forward
It's just sharing it on the night, I don't mind doing it, I think I've done that one in the past.
Okay.
But I'm happy to defer to somebody else if they'd like the opportunity.
What's the specific date and time?
So I don't know if you've got one yet.
We don't have one. Okay, that may be difficult to commit.
Yeah, okay.
But I mean, I think whoever's the lead member drives the date.
Okay, well that's useful.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, how do you feel?
I'm happy, I'm happy to do it on the night, and obviously the officers can come to me and work on a date, and then obviously plan, so we get office residents to come along, that's the committee, and then see what people have got to say.
So are we agreed suggestion?
So I'm more than happy to defer to others that wish to take the place, so there are others who do a working group, but.
I'm not seeing a great rush. So,
Yeah, I mean, I'll be here, so if it's in the evening, I'll be able to do it.
So it's quite lively, I think, discussions about repairs.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Yes, we do.
And of course, repairs will include damp and mould.
Of course it will, yeah, well, anything's fair game with that, when you've got residents in the room, so they're all.
But if it's technically a repair under a mould still.
It is.
So,
Technically, I'm not shutting one down, but about something slightly different.
so it's another opportunity to bring this item from the residents with the repairs as well.
Exactly, so perhaps the officers could be tasked as the action item to liaise with me over, propose a date and publicity plan, venues and all that kind of thing. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. And that leaves the working group. I think we have to agree the working group. We have our chair.
Yes. And the members of the working group will be Councillor Gardner and Councillor Issy.
Exactly.
I am thinking about the title actually. I'm not. I think we just leave it for now because supported accommodation is much wider than we're looking. So anyway.
So what do you propose the title is currently that we're leaving?
It was a working group on hostels.
Yes, it was. And you suggested we should keep it as that.
I mean, I'm happy to keep it as that. Okay. Yeah, because I just think, I mean, looking at old people and all the rest of it, it's a good thing to look at, but we're not going to be able to do everything.
I think that's from another group or another item. But there were reasons why you had changed in the first place. So although we want to retain the scope as agreed.
Yes.
If you would like to change it from hostels to find some other wording, can I leave that with you?
Yeah, just leave it for now, but
Okay.
we'll go back as a working time.
Yeah.
We'll have hostels. And just to say that Bella is very kind in undertaking some desk research so that we will have a full list of the different hostels and how many people are in them, how long they've been there, how much the council are they giving them money or whatever. So we'll kind of build up a picture from desk research of what we're looking at, and then we will go out and undertake visits.
Excellent.
I don't know how many there are. Do you know how many there are yet? About roughly.
I did see the survey today. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Okay.
Yeah.
So whether we'd be able to visit them all, I don't know. It kind of depends.
There's a lot.
There's a lot. Yeah, exactly. So we might have to be sort of
Selective.
pick types, different types, whatever. But yeah, that's the aim.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
We should arrange a meet. I think when you have something to show us, we'll arrange the first meeting.
Thank you. So we've agreed everything we need to agree on agenda item 7, which Item 7A, that was 7A, by the way. So this being the case, we are now to any other business. Are there any urgent matters?